Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Guilt that your parents gave you, now they're not even there and you still feel it. This is one of the toughest and most pervasive aspects of our existence. Sometimes it's given to us purposely. I mean, sometimes parents actually try to make you feel guilty for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they don't try to make you feel guilty. It's just their way of being in the world, their way of speaking, their way of interacting that makes you feel guilty. Either way, guilt in general is a debilitating emotion. Remorse is actually a functional emotion. You've done something wrong that has hurt another being. You feel remorse. That's the sadness of, oh my God, I'm so sorry I hurt you. I can't believe it. That's functional. That feeling is what distinguishes us from sociopaths. The knowledge internally that when we hurt another being, that we're hurting ourselves, the inability then to sleep, the inability to eat because you feel remorse about what you've done, that's functional, that's positive. That ensures that you're going to think 100 times before you do the same thing again. So remorse has a purpose. Remorse is also always very specific. You feel remorse that you didn't help the homeless person. You feel remorse that you said something that you didn't mean to say and it hurt someone you loved. Whatever it may be. Guilt is not a functional emotion. It's also not very specific usually. Guilt tends to be much more broad. You are not a good person. You're not a caring person. You're not, in the case with your parents, you're not a good son. And chances are, there are a lot of reasons you're not a good son. You didn't do right by your mother, you didn't do right by your father, you didn't do right by your siblings, whatever it may be. It tends to be more pervasive. And remorse is usually about an action. It's not you are a bad person, it's oh my God, that was a really mindless moment. That was a really ego-filled moment. I let my ego just run away with me. I was so unconscious in that moment. I was so selfish in that moment. So it's an action. It's not you are a miserable human being. Guilt is it's about you. And this is where it's so important to try to remove it from our lives. The problem is it's very insidious because the minute that you say, see, you're such a bad person, you feel guilty. So now you have something else to feel guilty about. You shouldn't feel guilty. So now you feel guilty that you feel guilty. And it goes in these cycles. So you can't remove it by the same means that we normally use. The issue with guilt is you have to look at it. You have to look at it. Guilt functions by us running from it. It functions as a voice of the Almighty. Because you only feel guilty because there is a voice in your head. I mean, you say from your parents. But if you were actually able to look at your parents as two people who were scared, who had unfulfilled expectations about their own lives, who had unfulfilled desires in their own lives, who have issues, and I say this without even knowing them, just because I know they're human, who have issues with their own egos, who have issues in their life that are not looked at, which I say because they've made you feel guilty, which means that they are expecting something from you for them, which means I have things that I'm not looking at in my own life, that somehow my life, my happiness has become your responsibility. But if you're able to really look at them like that, with compassion, with love, but with not giving them the quality of the omnipotent, omniscient, almighty that we give, that guilt would dissipate. If you were walking down the street, so let's say, for example, you're in a foreign country, your wallet with your passport and all your money has just been stolen. You don't have a rupee or a dollar to your name. You are on your way to the embassy to try to figure out how you're going to get a new passport, and you have nothing. You don't have an ATM card. You don't have a credit card. You have nothing. And on the way, you pass a beggar. And the beggar holds out their hand and says, "Give me money." Now, you'd like to give them money, but what you know is you can't. You don't have anything. You may feel sad for the beggar because the situation the beggar is in is a sad situation. And it may make you, wish that there weren't poor people in the world, and you may think about going back and, opening an NGO to help poor people, whatever. But you're not going to feel riddled with guilt for not being able to help that beggar in that moment, because you know that you literally can't. And so it's not going to fill you with guilt. And if that beggar, as you're walking away, says, "Selfish man, bad man, selfish man," it's going to sting a little if you're compassionate and you care, but it's not going to haunt you, because again, you know you couldn't. There was nothing in that moment you could do now. You may vow to go back and do something later on, but in that moment you had no ability to do anything. The voice of our parents is a voice that looms in our brain as the omnipotent, omniscient voice. And so instead of looking at them as humans with their own issues, with their own attachments, with their own desires and expectations and fears and confusion and ego and identities and all the things that we all have, we see them as this omniscient being. And even when that which they ask of us is something we cannot do, that voice looms as the voice of the Almighty. Selfish, bad. And it stays with us. And this is where it's so important to be able to really look at it objectively. As I was saying just the other night, the age at which most of our parents have us is mid-20s. Okay, anybody here 25 or younger, raise your hand. Anybody 25 or younger? If you're 25 or younger, stand up for a moment. Just stand, that's okay, just stand up for a moment. All right, everybody else look at them. Do they look omnipotent to you? They're very sweet. You can sit down, back down. They're very, thank you. They're very sweet. They're babies. Right? I mean, other than the one who really was a baby. I mean, you guys are adults, but you're not omnipotent beings. From the perspective of someone who's no longer 25, you look like babies. But we infuse in our parents, who in the vast majority of cases were right around that age when they had us. It's been my generation. I just turned 47. It's my generation that has started having children in their mid to late 30s or even 40s. But pretty much every generation before my generation as parents, mid-20s is common. And it's still common in most of the world. It's just America that, and some of the West that has changed that cycle. They were young. They were scared. They have their own issues. But we take in our lives that which they say as canon. It molds the very being of who we are. And if you could really, one of the things I actually find really helpful is find pictures of your parents when you were very young. Get pictures. Let's say your parents had you when they were 25. Well, find a picture of your mom and dad when they were 25 or 27 or 30 when they were, telling you bad boy, stupid, worthless, Look at pictures of them. They're going to look like babies. They're not going to look like the omnipotent beings of your psychic memory. And when you can do that, and if you can put them in context, the more you know about your parents' life, and I'm not saying this, that all of what they did to us, all of what they said to us, it's all okay, it's good, it's great, we shouldn't, have any issue, but to just put it in perspective. We all make mistakes. Did anybody before the age of 30 ever say anything you regretted? Did anybody before they were 30 say hurtful things to someone they loved? Do stupid things? Do any of us look back on those years and think, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I thought this was important. I can't believe I was so attached to that, whatever it may be. We look back on those years and we think, my God, thank God they're over. Because we're so much more grounded and centered and mindful. But that was the age when they were really impacting us. And so if you can really try to get a vision of it in context, here's what my mom was going through. Here's what my dad was going through. Here's why they weren't always available in that way, whatever the story may be. And it doesn't mean that your feelings of hurt or pain or anyone's are wrong and that you should feel guilty for feeling badly. It just gives you some perspective. And with that perspective, what you realize is, I have a choice to carry on what they told me. I'm no longer that age, but I've carried it for all these years. I have a choice. They said it to me at a time in their life when they were scared, confused, upset, whatever it was. Patterns in their life were not moving how they wanted to. That's why they have filled me with guilt. That's why they have given me the responsibility for their happiness in such a way that I feel guilty. But you don't have to carry that anymore. And letting that go, the last important point on this is letting that go is not letting go of our love for our parents. It's not disrespect for them. It's not a disservice to them. Rather, it's a service to them, because it's freeing them of the karmic bond of things that I'm sure they regret saying, regardless of whether they're still in the body or not still in the body. Things that were said and done at a time of their life that they would probably redo if they had an opportunity to. Just like we'd all redo certain times of our lives if we had the opportunity. So you now have the choice. And use that choice. Actually, the last point I wanted to mention on this is one of the reasons we hold on to guilt sometimes is it's that which connects us still to our parents. And if we let go of the guilt, it feels like we are cutting ourselves off from them. And so the guilt is that last bond. If I can just feel guilty enough, I'll stay connected to them in some warped sort of way. And this is where it's also really important to find within yourselves whether they're still alive and you have a relationship, fantastic. Still alive, you don't have a relationship, okay. No longer alive, okay. In any of these circumstances, how can you find a connection to them that doesn't rely on them saying to you, you are the best son ever? That doesn't rely on them saying, I'm so sorry. How can you find a connection to them that doesn't need that? And that's your challenge now, because when you can find that connection, you'll be able to let go of the guilt. So find that in your heart. And even if the only connection is thank you for bringing me into the world. Thank you for feeding me when I was hungry. I mean, even if it's just that, find a connection so that you don't need to hold on to the guilt to keep the relationship alive.